Today's guest is Craig Gramlich. He's the managing director at Lonewolf Consulting. All right, Craig, thank you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Hi, you're welcome. Happy to be
Awesome.
here.
Great. Your background, quite a number of years in and around the construction industry, the fleet management, maintenance. Would that characterize what sort of the bulk of your experiences?
I would say for the most part, that's the bulk of the experience. Always heavy equipment, a bit of accounting, and then a bit of operational frontline project management experience. So, but my focus and my love and ambition was always with equipment. And I've got stories dating back to childhood if we don't know where you want to start, but yeah.
Awesome. I like these childhood because I always kind of find it's not always the case, but it's commonly the case where where people kind of eventually end up kind of links to some sort of tendency people had as they were growing up. So
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of cool. Yeah, the one for me is like I was a kid that would crawl through the shop. Grew up in oil and gas, and I would sit in the lunchroom with the crew and probably heard and learned a whole lot more than I ever should have at a young age. And these are in the days when there wasn't really a whole lot of PPE to go in the shop either, and so you could just walk out into the shop, and I'd crawl up and over all the equipment, and I'd the smell of the oil and the grease. I absolutely loved it. And little did I know, like fast forwarding, that it would actually turn into like a meaningful career for me. But in the middle of all that, grew up on a farm, did the farming thing, picked a lot of rocks, made a lot of big rock piles, and and you have a lot of time to philosophize, I will say, as you are operating that tractor and picking rocks and thinking about life. And yeah, but my love for equipment has just always been there. Everything from that young age in the shop playing Lego, and even now, it's still there. I still act like a kid when I get around the big heavy equipment for equipment shows. So
love it. I mean, I saw your education was around, I guess, organizational things. At what point did you kind of get into sort of the construction and the equipment side?
great question, great question. So this probably is going to reveal a little bit. Is coming out of high school, I knew I wanted to go to like post secondary, and it was like I had the choice: U of A or U of S, and it was one had the hockey team, one had the terrible highway. So, so my decision was a little bit easier was to which school to go to, but the harder choice over that one was which area of focus.
Yeah.
And I loved engineering, but I was scared of the math, but
Mm.
yet I have such an engineer. Like I've been told, I have such an engineering mindset, and it's been one of the things that has allowed me to succeed no matter kind of what role has been put in front of me. So, formal education, I started life as an accountant. I came out with a Bachelor of Commerce, major in accounting, minor in organizational theory and design, and I went into a company and started doing that manufacturing company for about. I said I did 3 to 5 at the manufacturing company, and I realized that wasn't for me. I got headhunted to a heavy equipment contractor for an opportunity for equipment an analyst role, and I fell in love with it. Had a chance to build up their internal rates program and build up an internal equipment management program, and I started advancing the ranks. And as I did so, the senior leaders are like, you know what? We actually really value field experience. So if you want to get into these senior roles, you got to get some field experience.
Mm.
And at the time, I'm like, young family, no, not doing it. Or it's just not for me. I shouldn't have to do this. That's kind of naive belief. Fast forward a couple of years, that want to climb the ladder kind of tugged on me again, and the family kind of got stable, and it's like, let's do it. Let's go into the field, and worked with the management and had a choice as to which division. It was like you can go into mining, you can go into industrial, you can go into piling or pipeline. And so, of the four, the most rounded group that I'd see everything tip to tail was the piling team. I'd be able to do the estimating. I could handle the safety. I could do the quality. I could do the contracts and client negotiation, the billing, all of that, tip to tail, everything. So I did. I jumped into the piling team and started off as like a lowly coordinator at first, and did some vacation replacements for people on sites. And then I kind of got seconded or pulled into a PM role. It's like, this guy needs to stay on the site because we have a client that likes him.
Wow.
And so I took over a project that way that was actually failing. It was in the red. And by the time we were done, it clawed it back into, a double digit margin, which was beautiful. And so I actually learned I was really good at it. I was really good at project management and really good at estimating and managing the field crews. I had a great rapport with field crews, and that probably dates back to my time in the shop as a kid. Um, and yeah, so it was at that moment I started to learn, between my accounting and my equipment and my operations, how to translate languages across the teams and how to hear, what is really being asked. And it's a skill that stays with me today, and it'll come up in questions again. But yeah, so I kind of knew early on, Tats, that it was just accounting as it on its own was not going to be for me. I needed more, and equipment was that love.
It's funny, like in accounting plus, let's say, project management operations, accounting plus sales. I mean, those are like some of the most killer, backgrounds, I hear, often. Um, no, that's great.
Yeah,
What
there's
when you, yeah,
sorry to go a little bit deeper. There's a gentleman, who's a pioneer in the space, and I'd be remiss without mentioning him. His name is Mike Forster, and he's kind of like the grandfather of equipment economics. And so I crossed paths with him early on, back in '08, I want to say, when I was, doing the analyst thing and trying to figure out the programs and whatnot. And he shared with me at the time that those with an understanding of equipment that understood finance were like unicorns. If you could understand both, you're like a unicorn in the industry. And so he and I have kept in touch, and I would call him like my mentor. So we talk practically every month. And so I've kind of layered in the operational experience now, and I've kind of built on that saying that he's got. And so if you are an equipment guy who's got finance experience, you're a unicorn, right? But if you have operational experience on top of it, you're like the tip of the unicorn's horn. Uh, but you don't know it. That's the thing, is you don't understand how critical that skill is and how important it is to organizations until you are talking with them, supporting them, and answering their questions, because it's things that you take as just, gospel or understood or just fact, but yet organizations are still struggling to communicate across their teams.
yeah, yeah. We'll talk about some of the programs and the stories you have there, but what
Sure.
was your like sort of idea or thought on what it would be like to be in the field, and what was it there once you got there and you dug in? What were your sort of perceptions and sort of realizations as you went through it?
Oh, I would say there was a whole lot of assumptions made before I even got in the field. When you're sitting in the office and in the corporate office and whatnot, you kind of have this assumption like everything in the field, they have all the support. They have all the infrastructure, they have all the resources, of the organization, and everything they need to succeed. And then when you get boots on the ground and you walk into the job site and you open up that, 12 by 60 hour, the APCO site trailer door, and you realize we got a folding table for a desk, and we have a coffee maker with, day old coffee in it. And then you see the crew there, and you realize, after doing that for a couple of days, you kind of realize this is where the money's made. It's like the group out here really doesn't have, the resources and things that the head office thinks they do. And the hardest one at the time to accept for me was like the lack of internet connection. So nowadays we've got Starlink, which is amazing, and that's absolutely beautiful job sites. But at the time, like, we had these, practically dial up internet connections, and these bootleg kind of configurations where you're bouncing like antennas off of, so and so site trailer, or making a negotiation with a farmer's house to try to, link off their Wi-Fi and things like that, just so you can maintain connection to do your job. But those are things that you just take for granted when you're in the office. But in the field, those little things become big things. And once you kind of recognize that infrastructure and lacking whatnot, it forces you to kind of like raise your head up out of your computer and out of your contract and out of your drawings and go, okay, what can I do with my time that allows me to advance the work and do the best value possible for the client? and it turned into like working with the crew. What motivates you? How do you work safe? Why did you say that? Why did you swear at the client? Or why did do you understand what that I have to do now? Or like, so you start to build relationships, and you really start to see what matters most in the field. It slows you down to focus on what matters most. And I had that ability to see it and connect the client and the crews with the production, and it became very, very easy, Tats, to do my job because I just had to make sure everybody had what they needed to succeed. The materials, right? They were getting paid fairly. They're getting paid on time. The client was actually seeing progress in production, and then they get off your back, and you're not having incidents or safety. So you're the spotlight's elsewhere, and you know it just became natural. You know.
Yeah. I mean, so going into the first time you had to create one of these programs, what did you have to what did you start with, and how did you build it up? Because I think, some people are like, great, I want to know how to do this, but how do I get this going? You want to hear the first time you went through this and what you learned along the way.
What kind of program are you thinking of?
You were talking about equipment, various maintenance and other programs. I
Right.
don't know. It could be at various ones. Like one of the
Right.
early ones, you were sort of tasked to like get up and running.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So one of the early ones, we took on was actually related to a buyout. So about the time that I was in the operations project management team, which was a defined period of time role, our company got sold, or our division, I should say, got sold off. And in doing so, we had to move everything over into like a new accounting system and a new ERP system and a new software, which really kind of changed and impacted the way business would run. And there was nobody brought in from the equipment team at the time. They brought in the operations staff, they brought in some accounting and some safety and whatnot, but there was nobody from equipment. So I kind of raised my hand and volunteered and said, hey, I can do that too. I'll be a PM and I can do some of the equipment, and I'll kind of do it off the side of my desk because I love it. Um, so when I did that, it started with basic things like, what's our asset list and what's our fleet counts and how many of these do we have and what are they worth? And you work with accounting to get your CapEx, and then you help them with a chart of accounts and how you want to see your cost and manage your costs. And then it turned into bringing in the concepts like equipment economics. Like I want to see a profit and loss for my equipment. Like how much did I charge it out for? How much did I spend on it? And am I getting a return on it? And then it moves into things like, okay, we got to look at utilization and are we actually using the gear? And so overall, like it really focused on the four key things that, Mike Forster would teach, right? Which is you got to know your costs, you got to keep it working, you got to stop it from breaking, and you have to manage your fleet age. And those are really the four basic things like any good equipment company needs to do. And there's a lot more underneath of that. And we've got some tools and stuff that we've kind of built up with my own company that goes a level deeper. But really, at the heart, it's those four things.
Yeah, very cool. With what you're doing now, what does that look like?
Yeah. So what I do now is I dabble and I work in the space for companies to implement equipment management and heavy equipment economics concepts. So, like the teachings of the Mike Forsters and the AEMPs and the CEMP Centrals and all these other groups and ISO 55000. And you help organizations build up their programs that way. But in order to do that, you have to figure out, where are their strengths, where are their weaknesses, where are their gaps. And before we even start working with them, we'll kind of ask them, have you read this textbook or have you taken this course? And so that allows us to make sure we have a similar terminology and a similar kind of language to begin with. Then that would move into like us doing an assessment. And so we have a proprietary tool we call the equipment wheel or the equipment cycle. We've written about it in the Construction Equipment magazine, but it really pulls back on those four key things that Mike would talk about and goes a level deeper. So underneath of managing your fleet age, you're going to have things like, Do you have fleet standards that tell you what type of equipment to buy and what it needs to do for you? Do you then have procurement? How are you buying the goods you need for the equipment and the parts and repairs itself? And then do you also manage your fleet age? How are you handling your capex? And so there's things like this that are underneath of those four key topics Mike would talk about, and we assess the companies on each one. And we do it in a very unique way, I'll say. So a lot of consulting firms or organizations, they would just, you know, be pulled in as a specialist. They come in, they do an assessment, they write your report, and they send it in to you, and it's probably 100 pages long or 50 100 pages long, and you set it on the side of your desk, and it collects dust, and before you know it, it falls off your desk. And I know that because I've hired consultants like that in the past. And as much as you really want to make use of the reports and stuff that they give you and implement their initiatives, you get punched in the face with reality that you've got a full-time job, and your people have a full-time job, and all these net new things you want to bring in, you just don't have bandwidth and capacity for. So how we're different and why we're different is we'll work with companies as a do it with you or a do it for you kind of approach. And if it's a do it with you, we work with your bandwidth and capacity that you have, and we move at your pace. The do it for you, yes, you can have that, but the thing there is change management and the lasting change comes into question, because if you pay somebody to build your future, by the time you hand over the keys, are the individuals able to maintain it and keep it up and move it ahead, right? So I find that the do it with you approach is
Mm.
the successful one for lasting change. And what makes our approach even more unique, Tats, is that because of the concepts of equipment management, we've found there's three key pillars or three key points for decision makers with heavy equipment management. And it's a concept we call the internal equipment triangle. And each point on the triangle is one of the decision makers, and they are the equipment team, which can be like a fleet group or a maintenance group, and there's different terms what organizations call it depending upon their size, but there's somebody who manages the equipment. Then you have accounting, and this is your bean counters, your number crunchers, insert whatever term here. And then you have your operations team, and that's really where the equipment's used to make money. But how these groups form and exist is rather unique. Is originally you have maybe a mom and pop shop, or you're a sole proprietor. You buy yourself a piece of equipment and into the field you go to use it, and you're doing everything. You're doing the work, you're repairing the equipment, you're doing your bookkeeping, you're estimating the work, and you're getting things done. But as you grow and as you buy more gear, you have to hire people. And before you know it, your company's grown to the point where you've got specialists in each of those points. So for equipment, you've got a heavy duty or a ticketed tradesperson and maybe a full-blown maintenance professional. For accounting, you've got a CPA or a chartered accountant of some form. And for operations, you've got a PEng, like a professional engineer and operation staff on that side. But as those groups form and as those experts come in, they're experts in their own area. But where they struggle is that the triangle now has a gap in the very center, and that's where the work existed originally. That's what the business was formed to do. That's its function. That's where it made revenue. But as each of those teams come in, they kind of slightly pull away from that work unintentionally, of course, unintentionally. They all want to do a good job, but there's a language barrier. And that language barrier exists across three key teams, and it looks something like this as you use equipment. So this is for heavy equipment contractors that use the equipment for generation of revenue. It's going to sound and look something like this. The equipment team is going to believe they are guardians of the equipment. We need to protect the assets because it can't protect itself. It can't speak up for itself. Your operations team is going to look at the equipment and go, I just need that to produce revenue. It's a means to an end for me. I just need it to move dirt, break rock, drill holes, whatever that is. They just need the equipment for that purpose. And what ends up happening is they have to bid work. And the equipment team and accounting will kind of tell them how much it costs, so they'll create a rate. And operations is going to say something like, your rates are too high. equipment's then going to turn around and say, well, stop breaking it, and I wouldn't have to fix it, and it wouldn't cost so much. And then the accounting team, is sitting back with a little bit of popcorn, watching this go down at first, and then before you realize it, they're now putting on the referee shirt, trying to get in the middle of this, going, "Okay, what's going on? I really doesn't matter to me what the rate is. I just want a return on the investment." And but each of those three key teams, they want the same thing. They really want to produce revenue for the company. They want to manage costs and they want profit, but they struggle to communicate and interrelate how to do that. And I'll give you like a quick example about our like tying it back to the assessment is and how it matters for those three key teams is a question you ask each of those teams can deal with the same topic, but can be very different. So let's talk about unit numbering.
Mhm.
Simple concept. Somebody would hear this on the podcast and they would say, well, yeah, we've got unit numbers. We're fine. And most maintenance and equipment people would be like, yeah, it's standard practice. We do that. But the questions go something like this, is it would be for the equipment team, do you use unit numbering? Yes, no kind of answer. For the operations team, is the unit numbers easy to understand? Does it make sense to you? And more importantly, are you tracking usage to the units? Are you inputting time and tracking it to the unit? And then for accounting, it looks something like this is are you tracking cost to the unit? Each of the three key teams plays a slightly different part and provides a slightly different piece of information to the puzzle that your senior leaders want and need in order to run the business. But it all relates to unit numbering. And on the surface, it's just a unit number, but each one uses it slightly different, and they have to in order to provide the result the organization needs. So that's kind of the tie-in and the focus of that internal equipment triangle concept. And so how we help organizations is we have deep subject matter expertise across each of the three. So we have individuals with experience from all three groups. We also have specialists in each of the areas as well. And so when it comes to supporting an organization, on the do it with you approach, we can really work alongside their people, use their language and help them change and help them get better at what they do.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You alluded to earlier, just to make sure everyone's speaking the same language, right? Have
Yeah,
you taken this course or this terminology and stuff like that, just as a starting point, and then understanding the nuances beyond that from a group within the organization. Makes sense. So, um, with all this stuff, where, I mean, what sort of things that you're tracking in terms of trends or technologies or things that affect the stuff that you do?
right. Good question. So where we're finding now the intersection and where things are getting a little bit bumpy and clunky for companies is when they in their software and their delivery and their I would call implementation of these concepts. Um, a lot of organizations, unfortunately, are still using like paper time cards. So when you start to look around at the industry and you see these beautiful things broadcasted out there, like single pane of glass, and telematics, and fault code integration, and you've got all these beautiful concepts out there that senior leaders are going to hear about. The challenge is most organizations in the field, coming from that field background, are one level above paper time cards. So when you see the flash of these fault code integrated telematics and you see the reality in the field of a paper time card, there's a big gap in between. And unfortunately, the patience of business nowadays is significantly reduced. Like the pace of business is quick. Like you got to move quick, otherwise you can lose out to a competitor pretty fast. A lot of businesses have gone out of business or gone under by not being able to manage costs on their equipment. So software I see as being a key piece organizations have to look at. The challenge is software cannot be a solution on its own, is it can only do what you ask it to do or tell it to do. So if your business doesn't necessarily have the processes, the procedures, the structure in place to collect the data, it's never going to be able to report the data to you. So we're finding that the software is the leveler of the playing field. Is a lot of organizations were attempting to implement a flashy ERP or a bolt-on system, to solve a problem, but it ends up creating more problems than potentially before they even started it or implemented it. It just made them happen faster. Um, well, unfortunately, that's the reality. It made the problem happen faster. And for the work we do, it just really shines a spotlight on the importance of those three key teams working together, having the structures and the systems, and change management. Change management cannot be underestimated. Like moving that field from a paper time card to a digital time capture tool, or even like iPads or an app-based system, like that's monumental for a
Yeah.
lot of organizations. Like that's a big thing.
I mean, is it, and I'm just wondering, obviously understanding where you are out in the field, in the office, understanding the people that are involved, but, is part of the find the solutions, it's sort of solving it manually and then looking, or is it part of, hey, find a vendor that understands the gaps and have accounted for this transition or this, so that the wedge isn't as steep? How do you think about it?
Yeah, great question. I love that. It's a bit of both, to be honest with you. Like, and it really depends how switched on your management team and your decision makers are. And why I say that is this is organizations are almost kind of have an evolution to them, and businesses have an evolution to them, and they're naturally looking at whomever they know and trying to replicate and copy, because they always say that imitation is the biggest form of flattery, and that's natural and normal. But there are other industries out there who have kind of stepped over some of these learnings or some of these high dollar mistakes, we'll say. And the easy one I can talk to is like, an on premise ERP system versus a cloud based ERP system and data. A lot of businesses still believe you need to have an on premise system and you need to control and own all your data, and it has to go into that one box. But there's organizations out there who kind of stepped over that and gone, you know what, well, let's look at cloud directly. We'll go straight there and we'll look at some data lakes, data mining, and it's still our data, but we harness it in a very different way. And I'm going to use the term agnostic, but that's not the right term. It is data that can be accessed no matter which software solution you choose. So if today you're working with a JD Edwards, tomorrow you can work with an Acumatica, but you still have your history and your data because you've put it into a separate data warehouse. But you won't know that, unfortunately, if you are only fixated or only looking at, the on-premise solution. And the only way you find those solutions is you have to, get out to industry, you have to get out to conferences, you have to find consulting firms like us or others who have been there, done that, and step over some of the maybe costly mistakes that other organizations have made, and be willing to take a risk on, something that is maybe a little bit outside your comfort zone. And it's not to say you have to go to what I call the bleeding edge of tech, because there's a level of tech out there that is always cutting edge, which is also bleeding edge. Um, but it's finding those tried and true and proven solutions that maybe you hadn't considered before. And this ties in with a book, a book I read a long time ago about like the third option, and really, so you have my belief as to or what the opinion is. We have your belief as to what the opinion is, and then we can actually find a third option, which is working together. But lots of times, Tats, that third option won't even come to you if you aren't willing to talk about it and you aren't willing to actually consider, there could be another way of doing things.
Sure.
Um, and that honestly kind of ties in like with what I hear with businesses when we work with them in software side for sure is our business is different. We're unique. We We've we need to do it this way, and that leads down the software path of customization versus what I would call configuration. And customization is very slippery and costly, and because every time you do it, you then need to undo it in order to do updates lots of times.
Yeah.
Whereas if you can slightly modify your process or system, you can just configure things and be much, much further ahead with a stronger solution. But it's coming back to that, finding that third option. So,
No, I like that. It's like, the inventions, right? Over the years, certain inventions are credit to individuals, but if you look at any invention in that period of time, there's multiple people working on similar things or had similar solutions. One
yes,
just, got to the patent office first.
exactly. Like I think the person follows back like the light bulb, the invention of the light bulb or some of the electricity stuff, and that's what it was. I think it was Edison versus Tesla and a few other things, and it was interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Anything else you want to share that I didn't ask you?
Um, yeah. So I would say this is skill set wise on the equipment side. Um, this is going to tie in with the concept of change management for organizations and how we approach succession planning. And an important concept here is businesses will often promote from within. Nothing wrong with that. It's a beautiful thing to do to build your people up and whatnot. The challenge is we're moving our people into net new roles like a supervisor, a manager, a fleet manager, an equipment role that there really isn't a whole lot of formal education that's been one either given by the company or two even exists in the industry. And so when I look at the shop in equipment management, there's not a whole lot of formal education out there that's really offered in the industry. The AEMP has a program for like equipment management specialist and certified equipment manager, and those are great if you are, I would say, in the mid-level management kind of office level. But if you're coming up off the tools as a heavy duty mechanic moving into supervisory role and maybe just touching into fleet and equipment, um, what's there to support you? So the EMS can help, um, but what about people management? What about um, human resources? What about labor relations? What about the obstacles and expectations of the business and your expectations of your senior leaders? And so there's all this, I will say, tribal knowledge that you only gain from working inside of an organization for a number of years. And so when we move our people off the tools into these new roles, is we can't underestimate the importance of that education for them to be successful. So yesterday they were turning wrenches, and today we're asking them to manage people. Their natural go-to is to always go back to want to turn a wrench or to diagnose or troubleshoot or help out in the field. But the expectation from the management and leadership team is very different. It's now you need to think about budgets and staffing and safety and quality and all these areas that you never had to consider before. And so there hasn't really been, I would say, a whole lot of training to focus in and help these individuals kind of advance in those ranks and roles unless you go to these specialist courses. So you would send your new supervisor, maintenance supervisor to a safety course and learn about that. And you would send them to a quality course and you'd send them to a labor relations course and you send them to, years and years and decades worth of teachings and they figure it out in time. They absolutely do. Well, we've kind of packaged together a training program called Equipment Masters that is geared at your fresh off the tools management supervisors or really anybody who works with equipment that doesn't have a whole lot of background in that area. And so it's going to cover things like, obstacles, um, solutions for your shop, the rituals for success, how to manage your shop itself, gets into a little bit of the dollar value management, how to self-assess your program. Like we actually give them like a reduced version of that equipment wheel and equipment cycle concepts that we do in order so they can look at it and kind of manage their area and self-assess on their own. And so it's a 7-week program, only a couple hours a week. But when they're done and they walk away, they have a one-page roadmap that looks something like this. And I know people who listen to it can't see this, but it's a single document that the individual kind of holds true for the whole year. It's their whole year planned on a piece of paper with everything that matters to them is going to matter to the business in their work area. And the beauty of it is they've created it. They're owning it and they're tying themselves to it versus it being a top-down kind of direction. And it's unique in the sense of they're creating their own projects for things they want to move ahead. It's providing that little bit of project management experience and expertise to be able to do just that on their own, because otherwise you don't know how to advance an initiative, how to move a new, change in place, like that time card, move from paper in order to digital time capture. How would you move something like that ahead? So there's a little bit of project management sprinkled in to kind of teach people how to do that. And then there's just enough in there about maintaining your personal side with the relationship management, because those relationships that you formed when you are on the shop floor have to shift and have to change when you move into a supervisory role. And it's something that's often downplayed and not fully understood is, those the crew you used to go out with beers with on Friday, you now are asking Monday morning in order to work overtime. How do you do that without caving? Some can, some absolutely can, Tats. They can just, draw that hard line and it's easy, but most can. Most need a little bit of support and guidance as to how to balance results with relationships, how to handle these obstacles and challenges as they come up in these new roles. And so we package a lot of this wisdom and experiential knowledge from working with organizations and from doing it ourselves to build up this course and to give people like a simple one-page roadmap for success.
Sure. No.
It's unique, and I'm really proud of it.